Pancake, everyone! This is the Tsar Tank, a Russian wonder weapon from the times of the First World War, and here we have a combat catamaran from the same era. And these are far from the most peculiar and unusual armaments of the First World War, which became a testing ground for new types of weaponry. In this video we will tell you about the most unconventional combat mechanisms and inventions of the First World War. The Tsar Tank. This insane war contraption is essentially a machine gun that moved on enormous 9-meter spoked wheels. Russian engineer Nikolai Lebedenko invented this design in 1915. He took the concept of two observation wheels and attempted to create a combat vehicle which, as later discovered, surpassed the size of even the largest tanks of the Second World War. The tank also had a third wheel, which had a much smaller diameter and was located at the rear, and served as a stabilizer. The constructor's idea was based on the experience of Central Asian warriors, whose chariots easily leaped over trenches. The construction of the Tsar Tank was personally approved by Nicholas II, before whom Lebedenko arranged a rather original presentation. The engineer built a small prototype of the machine with a spring-powered mechanism, set it in motion, and released it. The astonished monarch witnessed the toy easily climb several stacked books. Impressed by the miracle monster, Nicholas allocated a huge sum of money to the engineer, especially considering the times. The Tsar Tank could have solved the problem of battlefield mobility, as it could simply roll over anything in its path. However, the machine was not without its flaws. When the sole prototype of the tank was built, it turned out that firstly, its armor was weak. Secondly, despite the fact that the giant wheels were powered by two 250 horsepower engines, this energy was transferred inefficiently. The critical flaw in the design was the rear wheel, which bore too much load, causing it to get stuck constantly in any kind of soil. Additionally, during the prototype construction phase, practical problems arose due to the machine's peculiar configuration. For example, the enormous wheels drastically narrowed the firing sector for the crew, while they themselves were vulnerable to enemy fire. For understandable reasons, this machine never got to participate in combat on the fronts of the First World War. However, you must agree the concept was intriguing. Next we'll talk about the first bombers, wire cutters, and even fake trees. And that's just the beginning of the list. Another rather unusual invention that few people know about for reasons you're about to discover. It all began with the concept of individual means for overcoming water obstacles, specialized combat catamarans. Long pontoons were attached to a soldier's legs similar to skis, on which they were supposed to smoothly cross rivers or streams. Needless to say, the idea was not very successful because numerous infantrymen crossing the river in this way made for excellent targets. So the French decided to enhance the idea and started equipping their infantry with stilts to cross shallow water bodies. As you might have guessed, this didn't lead to anything positive. Yes, you heard it right. We're talking about an actual wire cutter for barbed wire. The problem was that vast areas of abandoned land entangled with thousands of kilometers of barbed wire posed a serious obstacle for advancing infantry. Not to mention a whole tank could get entangled in tons of wire. Thus, a solution was needed to overcome this vexing barrier. That's when, following the analogy of a hay cutter, the French and the British invented a wire cutter. The idea was for a large pruner to be attached to a tractor or a vehicle, and the machine, protected by a special armored casing, would slowly move forward, grinding down rows of wire. At least that's how the vision appeared in the inventor's dreams. However, in reality, the machines were quite cumbersome and rather crude contraptions. They frequently broke down and often got stuck in shell-created fields. Most importantly, they often got entangled in the coils of their main enemy, barbed wire. In the end, the experiment wasn't very successful. This curious invention turned out to be not very effective. By the way, the French, quite desperate, even came up with the idea of firing real boarding hooks from cannons toward the barbed wire. The goal was to catch and tear down the rows of obstacles. You can probably guess the outcome of that idea. It might seem like this combat tree escaped from a comic book or an April Fool's prank. However, no. Creating fake natural objects for observing the enemy was practiced by many warring countries. During the First World War, the practice of frontline camouflage advanced further than in the entire history of previous wars. Continuous observation was required along the entire front line, especially in hotspots. Since there were no space stations or drones at that time, creativity had to come into play. The French started by disguising observation posts as trees. Then they taught this trick to the British. The Germans followed suit. Since the enemy maintained continuous surveillance, it was impossible to simply build a new tree from scratch. After all, if a tree suddenly appeared out of nowhere, it would immediately raise suspicion and become a target for artillery fire. Therefore, the fake tree had to replace an existing one. First, a dead tree, for example, one damaged by bombs and shells, was selected near the trenches and dugouts. Then the tree was photographed, studied, measured, and working models were created. Under the cover of darkness and artillery fire, the tree would be cut down, and in its place, its most accurate replica would be erected. Entry into the observation tower was situated in a recess, and it wasn't feasible to dig a trench to it, as that might expose the object to aerial reconnaissance. Soldiers had to ascend to the top to conduct observations using binoculars and periscopes through observation windows. Historians say that none of these tree disguises were ever uncovered by the enemy. Modern-style hand grenades, which are well known to all of us, began to be widely used in all armies during the years of the First World War. These were either egg-shaped grenades or grenades with long handles equipped with a lever or removable safety pin. By the way, one of the most famous grenades in history is the German potato masher. It received its name due to the recognizable shape of its wooden handle. However, in addition to regular-shaped hand grenades, during the First World War, various experimenting countries began conducting experiments. In Germany, the result of such experimentation led to the development of the disc grenade, designated as the Discus Handgranate M1915. Externally, this invention resembled a turtle's shell. Consequently, this weapon also earned its second name, the turtle grenade. The disc grenade was created by the German company Dynamit AG, which obtained a patent for this unusual invention a few years before the global conflict began, specifically in 1911. It's worth noting that the main feature and true structural peculiarity of the disc grenades was not just their shape, but their unique fuse. The fuse, assembled in the disc-shaped casing of the hand grenade, consisted of 6 radially arranged tubes, resembling a 6-pointed star in the arrangement, converging at the grenade's center. Disc grenades had excellent aerodynamics, which allowed soldiers to throw them at considerably longer distances compared to cylindrical or egg-shaped grenades. Upon impact of the casing edge against an obstacle, the cap would pierce one of the tubes, resulting in the detonation of the hand grenade. However, despite all this, the weapon had many shortcomings. The disc grenade couldn't be used on soggy or soft ground, as it often failed to detonate due to insufficient impact force against the ground. The same essentially applied to grenades falling on snow or water. Moreover, for proper and effective use of such grenades, soldiers had to undergo separate training and develop the necessary proficiency. Additionally, the scattering of fragments also raised questions. Upon detonation, most of the shrapnel could be driven into the ground and into the air. In general, due to these reasons, the frontline life of turtle grenades was short-lived. Among the lesser-known weaponry of the First World War period today, the Flechette, or more simply put, the aviation dart, can undoubtedly be included. In terms of size, it didn't exceed an ordinary pencil. It's worth noting that by the start of the First World War, military aviation was still in its infancy. Planes were mainly used for aerial reconnaissance and communication. Fighter and bomber aviation were just emerging. Therefore, for that time, these darts represented a breakthrough. They weighed considerably less than bombs, and even planes with low-power engines could carry several hundred of these very sharp and relatively long metal spikes. The flight of these projectiles was stabilized by tail fins. Italians invented this weapon, but the French were the first to use it. The darts were placed in a container attached externally to the underside of the plane. Flying over enemy camps, the pilot would pull a special string that extended to the lid of the box. The projectiles would be propelled towards the ground, gaining speed and kinetic energy. Hitting the target, the darts could penetrate steel helmets and uniforms, causing severe internal injuries. Over time, all sides of the global conflict began using flechettes, and they were used extremely actively. It's known, for example, that a single French pilot in 1915 rained down about 18,000 of these projectiles on the enemy in one day. However, after some time, carefully considering the combat effectiveness as well as the cost-quality ratio of these aviation darts, the military quickly became disillusioned with this weapon. The reason was that such a deadly rain from the sky was completely uncontrollable, and hitting the target was a stroke of immense luck. Moreover, for such a dart to penetrate the enemy's uniform, pilots had to climb to a great height, which in turn reduced the accuracy of the projectiles. In short, it was a closed loop. Machine guns were invented even before the First World War, and their appearance greatly changed the face of warfare. They unleashed a hailstorm of lead on the enemy. These weapons weren't particularly accurate, but that wasn't usually necessary. Mass infantry advances towards enemy positions became senseless, as machine guns were ready to mow down as many people as needed in a short span of time. The inevitable result was trench warfare. Soldiers of the warring armies sat opposite each other in trenches, fearing to expose their heads, as doing so often resulted in a precise shot from the enemy. Snipers played a significant role in this situation, tasked with demoralizing the enemy by shooting those who inadvertently exposed themselves from cover. The Periscope Rifle emerged as a product of soldier ingenuity, primarily driven by the desire to survive. This led to the rather simple yet interesting idea of combining a rifle with a trench periscope. This allowed snipers to aim and shoot without raising their heads above the parapet, avoiding further endangering their lives. Similar makeshift designs were created spontaneously and rapidly spread across the Belgian, French, British, Russian, and German armies. Thus, determining the origin and national affiliation of this invention is extremely challenging. However, regardless of where they were made, these homemade makeshift designs were generally similar. Such rifles were mounted on a kind of frame and raised above the trench. A special mirror attached directly in front of the standard sight allowed observing the surroundings. Periscope rifles were usually equipped with enlarged magazines. The weapons looked unusual and, truth be told, quite clumsy. Nevertheless, despite this, they proved to be rather effective and accurate. It's known that resourceful soldiers experimented with mounting machine guns and even pistols on similar frames. Friends, you have the opportunity to join the Pancake team. If you have video editing skills, can voice over videos in Russian and English, or if you write interesting scripts, we would be happy to work with you. Write to us at the email provided in the description. That's all from us. Subscribe to the channel and don't miss the next interesting episode. Have a great mood and see you next time.